UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan calls it a crisis. Talks aimed at getting rid of nuclear weapons have collapsed. The review of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty can't even agree an agenda.
It's shocking and disappointing that the diplomats from 170 countries, after negotiating for a full month, do nothing to reduce the number of nuclear weapons around the world and declare they cannot see any progress.
On July 1st, 1968, 61 representatives of nations from around the world gathered at the United Nations in an attempt to put the nuclear genie back in the bottle.
It's 35 years since the NPT was signed, but there are still 30,000 nuclear weapons in existence. Most of them are ready for use.
We don't have a Cold War anymore between two great powers who might blow themselves to pieces at any second. There are, however, a huge number of nuclear weapons in the world now owned by various states, some of which the United States calls rogue and some of which I call rogue, which the United States friends.
This memorial commemorates an event 20 years ago which changed the course of the nuclear arms race. The Greenpeace flagship Rainbow Warrior arrives in New Zealand after a 4-month voyage across the Pacific.
The atmosphere in New Zealand was very much for a nuclear-free Pacific, and the Rainbow Warrior was something of an icon, as a symbol, even then.
Greenpeace plans to protest against French nuclear testing on Mururoa Atoll. Nearly 200 atomic bombs have already been detonated there.
There's a lot of Polynesian people on the islands around there that you can't get to, and there's a lot of cancer, there's a lot of health problems in French Polynesia and across the Pacific from that. But now they're testing underground, and they are testing neutron bombs. And they're just turning that island, that atoll, into just Swiss cheese. They're blowing it to smithereens.
France is determined to stop Greenpeace. A team of 13 undercover agents is sent to Auckland to make sure the Rainbow Warrior can't sail to Mururoa.
The sound was actually kind of a weird sound, you know, not the type of sound you immediately think, hey, this is a bomb, you know. It's just a bang, you know. And it's obvious it was from the engine room.
French Navy combat frogmen placed 2 underwater mines against the hull of the Rainbow Warrior. They explode just before midnight.
I didn't really realize what it was. I just woke up, and I thought we'd been in a collision with another boat at sea.
The ship sinks in minutes. Greenpeace photographer Fernando Pereira drowns, trapped below deck.
A friend of us got murdered. It was pure out murder. You know, they didn't give us any warning.
But the French saboteurs are careless.
Some newspaper commenters said that all that was missing was a beret, a baguette, and a bottle of Beaujolais.
2 French agents posing as a Swiss honeymoon couple are arrested as they try to leave the country.
It was a bit like, I don't know, one of those Pink Panther or Inspector Clousseau movies where they were completely inept. And I think incredibly arrogant.
Major Alain Maffard and Captain Dominique Prieur are charged with conspiracy, arson and murder. President François Mitterrand denies French involvement, but damning evidence leaks to the newspapers.
Cette stratégie du mensonge, qui était celle du ministère de la Défense, de l'ensemble de l'institution militaire et de l'Élysée, emmenait Mitterrand dans une impasse. Parce qu'un jour ou l'autre, la vérité sortirait et Mitterrand lui-même serait en plus grande difficulté.
The head of the French Secret Service, Admiral Pierre Lacoste, is sacked. Defense Minister Charles Hernu resigns.
The people who had actually done the bombing had escaped, and the French were sheltering them.
A last-minute plea bargain sees Maffard and Prieur plead guilty to manslaughter. They're sentenced to 10 years in jail to be served in New Zealand.
And that shows you just how stupid military people can be. One destructive, killing act against an unarmed defenceless ship killed a member of its crew and sealed in place the very policy they were fighting so hard to overcome.
Mitterrand threatens devastating economic sanctions against New Zealand unless the agents are released.
People were extremely disappointed and felt, you know, we're being pushed around here, we're being bullied by a government that is not abiding by the basics of international ethics. That was a shock, that was a learning experience.
The French government pays Greenpeace $8 million compensation. Another $13 million goes to the New Zealand government.
Letting so many French agents escape jail, then that's not justice. Not in our eyes, not in my family's eyes, and I hope not in the world's eyes. And it's never too late for justice.
Less than 3 years after the attack on the Rainbow Warrior, Pereira and Maffar are back home.
I feel a sense of total betrayal because they behaved with consistent dishonesty, consistent treachery, and totally in breach of their word. 4 years of lies, broken promises, pressure and deceit.
The old Rainbow Warrior never did make it to Mururoa, but the French plan backfires badly.
You don't have to be very bright to know if you bomb your enemies, it turns them into martyrs.
Certainly it made Greenpeace's name, it put on the map.
10 years after the bombing, Greenpeace returns to Mururoa with a new Rainbow Warrior. The French are waiting.
At around 6:30 a.m, commandos and inflatables stormed the Rainbow Warrior as it entered the main channel into the pass at Mururoa. The commandos broke open the window on the bridge of the Rainbow Warrior and threw tear gas onto the bridge, and commandos entered the lower deck and took an axe to the door of the radio.
Keep going, lads. Okay, we get the doors open. No. Get out. Tear gas.
Pictures of the French attacks are flashed around the world. This time, there can be no cover-up.
It was very stupid politics, actually, I have to say. We had a real difficult period with the French for about, well, until the end of the testing in '96.
In 1996, President Jacques Chirac agrees to join the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. French testing in the Pacific is finally at an end. But even today, the treaty has no legal force.
Well, there's still 30,000 nuclear weapons around the world, and that's still a very scary prospect.
The US, along with 10 other states, still refuses to ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty.
They're trying to convince us that you can use smaller nuclear weapons in conventional war. And they are driving that. They are driving a new nuclear arms race.
In the 60 years since Hiroshima, more than 2,000 nuclear weapons have been detonated around the world. Today, the protests have moved away from Mururoa. New threats have emerged. Radioactive waste, mini-nukes, dirty bombs, crumbling nuclear reactors. It's a volatile mix.
The problem with nuclear power is that civil nuclear technology and military nuclear technology are identical. So if countries go into civil nuclear power, then they inevitably have the technical knowledge and the materials to produce nuclear weapons. And I think for that reason alone, we shouldn't go down that route.
The Non-Proliferation Treaty needs radical updating. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty still has no legal force.
We'll say to the French and to the British and to the Chinese and to the Russians and to the Americans, thank you. We don't want any of your nuclear weapons. And you've signed something that says you're going to disarm. I want to hold you to it.
2 decades after the French tried to bomb Greenpeace into silence, the nuclear threat remains all too real.
1985, we were still in the Cold War. 10 years later, we could believe that the threat of nuclear war had much receded. Now, 10 years later, again in 2005, we still have 30,000 nuclear weapons. We have insecurity, we have fear, we have terrorism, and we have loads of nuclear weapons. They have to go now, and the big powers need to make the first step. They have the biggest responsibility.